Well, it's Clive DeCarl here, and I'm very pleased to welcome one of my very favorite guests, Spencer Feldman from the United States, who has enlightened me on a number of subjects over the years. And he's just about to enlighten us all, myself included, I feel certain, on various things about the microbiome that we didn't previously know about. And I think everybody knows how important the microbiome is. And one of the incredible things I find is that, of course, the microbiome, they say, is one cell wall thick, apparently. I don't know quite who's been in there to check, but apparently that's the case. And you've heard the phrase "full of shit," and so what happens is that people don't realize that bits of feces can leak through the gut wall into the bloodstream and into the brain. When they say that person's full of shit, they might actually be being literal. I don't know what you think about that. Not the most charming introduction, but I hope it's all right.
Hey, Clive. The microbiome is definitely something that we're learning more and more about all the time. So what I want to do is give your audience some of the more recent research, some really basic tools on how to test it without a $500 kit, without a $500 stool test, and some things you can do you might not have thought about to really improve it, and why you'd want to. I suppose we should start out with what the microbiome is. So the microbiome is a mix of thousands of different species of bacteria, fungi, viruses that live symbiotically with us, although sometimes there's things in there that are not so symbiotic, that are parasitic. And the primary microbiome is your large intestine, but actually every part of your body is colonized. There's a microbiome in the brain. There's one in the liver, in the lungs. So all the real estate, all the surface area of the body basically has something living there. And it's important that what's living there is symbiotic with us, is helping us rather than living off of us and hindering us. Now, the microbiome is responsible. We used to, sometimes we're told, oh, the microbiome is the second brain, but actually it's the first brain. When cells became elongated into worms, which were, you could argue, the first, animal on the planet. Basically, the first animals were movable guts, and microbiomes were in there. So the microbiome, which is kind of like the worm, you might say, that is inside of us, that long tube, is the primary. It's the first thing that came on evolutionarily, and it's responsible for it. So these, our brain, our liver, our pancreas, these are all secondary effects. These are all backups or specializing organs that do the work that the microbiome originally did. It just does it better. So the microbiome can think, the microbiome can manage sugar, the microbiome can detoxify. All the things that all our organs can do, the microbiome can do, did it first, and in some ways does it better. So the microbiome is responsible for regulating basically every system in the body, and it does this by creating and managing the levels of over 500,000 different metabolites that make up 40% of the compounds in our bloodstream. So in terms of the immune system, the microbiome has more immune cells than the blood and bone marrow combined. In terms of hormones, the microbiome has more endocrine activity than, if you weigh out, for instance, the microbiome, it weighs more than all the endocrine glands in the body. In terms of information processing, the microbiome is 3 times heavier than the brain. In terms of a genetic database, and this is a big one, the microbiome has 1,000 times more genetic information than our own DNA. It's regulating our blood sugar, it's regulating our hormones, it's detoxifying, it's doing all these things. Now, a lot of people now that sequencing the genome has gotten down to $100, will sequence their genome and they'll find out, oh gosh, I have this mutation. I don't methylate well, or I don't deal with histamine well, or I don't convert glutamate into GABA well, or whatever the mutation is. And they might feel that that's fate, that's destiny. There's nothing they can do about it. Well, actually, the hope, the message of hope is that even though you might not methylate because of your DNA, your microbiome can methylate, and it can do that for you. even though you might not detoxify that well in your liver, your microbiome can detoxify. It can do it for you. So it's, you could say it's not, I guess you could say it's a backup or a duplicate system of almost every other system in your body. It's like a physical guardian angel. So, you know, if I ask someone to draw a tree, you know, they draw the trunk and the branches and the leaves. Very rarely would they draw the roots underneath the ground, because we don't see that when we walk out and look at trees. So it's not in our consciousness. But if you see that there's some problems with the leaves on the tree, one of the first things you need to think about is, are the roots getting the nutrition they need? So the microbiome really is the roots of our metabolic tree, and we want those roots to be healthy.
What percentage of the population do you think have got a damaged microbiome? Is it everybody, or what do you think?
Well, you know, I am trying to find some people who can serve as microbiome transplants for people that have completely lost their microbiome. And I'm having a difficult time doing that. I'm having a difficult time finding anybody anywhere that has a good microbiome that can serve as a donor. So I guess the question is, how did that happen, right? All right, so where do we get the microbiome? Then we could talk about how we lost it and then how to recover it again. So as you know, primitive humans and you know the creatures we may have evolved from were going about their business. They were eating things, drinking water from rivers and lakes with bacteria, eating food with soil and bacteria. So we were constantly exposed to bacteria, and it would colonize our gut. And some of those bacteria might kill us. Some of them might be parasitic, and some of them might be commensal, meaning they didn't help us and they didn't hurt us. Well, over time, the commensals realized that, or had an evolutionary pressure to benefit us, because the healthier we are, the healthier they are, because you know bacteria loves living in a human gut, right? It's warm, it's moist, there's low oxygen, and there's constant food source coming in that's already pre-digested. So as we get healthier, the microbiome gets healthier. So the microbiome, as it starts adapting and evolving to work with us, starts helping us out. And over time, it learns a lot of neat tricks, like how to make B12 for us, and how to kick out the parasites of the fungi and the bad bacteria and protect us, how to make us more fertile, how to make us live longer, how to make us heal faster. So over time, the microbiome has been a really remarkable ally and upgrade in terms of just making us healthier across the board in any way you can imagine, because anything it does to improve us makes it better. And so, you know, it learned how to regulate our blood sugar. Even if a person gets diabetic, the microbiome can say, well, wait a minute, that's not really good for me. And so the microbiome learns how to manage the blood sugar for us and detoxify us and keep our hormones at an even keel. It's really the best friend you've ever had in terms of your health. And for all the things the microbiome will do for you, it's only asking for the leftovers, the things you can't even digest. So let me tell you some of the things it'll do, and then we'll talk about how we lose it and then how to get it back. I've identified 4, you could call them initiations, biological initiations, rites of passage, as it were, that the microbiome does. And the first one actually happens in utero when we're in the womb. The microbiome of the mother manages or oversees the development of the fetal brain and that brain architecture. So the intelligence that we enjoy as humans, the complexity of our brain structure, is in part due to the mother's microbiome. So it's important for women to get the best microbiome they can, because it'll give them smarter kids. The second initiation happens right after we're born, and hopefully breastfed. And the first few breastfeedings have the immunoglobulins, which is in colostrum. It's mostly immunoglobulin A. And what that does is it teaches the new immune system of the baby what to tolerate. So at the same time that the mother is delivering the new microbiome through the breast milk, because there's the microbiome of the mother, good bacteria comes out of her gut, travels via the lymphatic system to her breast milk, and then inoculates the baby. So as that baby is getting all these bacteria didn't see before, the baby is also getting the immunoglobulin A, so that says, hey, these are good guys, they're on your team, don't attack them. So that's the second initiation. The third initiation is the brain part two, right? The microbiome continues to guide our brain development afterwards. Unlike most animals, like, there's a lot of animals that when they're born, they can walk, they can, they have to, because if not, they're going to get eaten by a tiger or something. So most animals are born very functional, or a lot of animals are born with a lot more functions than we have as humans. And part of that is we're not fully myelinated. When we're born, the nerves, you could almost say we have MS when we're born. The nerves are not completely myelinated. The insulation isn't all the way there. And you need the breast milk, which has nervonic acid in it, to myelinate nerves. We make a product, about it called Nervidine, which has nervonic acid in it if you think that's an issue for you. But yes, so the microbiome actually in the gut is going to help complete the myelination process of the nerves, and that's what gives, it also stimulates continued growth in the prefrontal cortex, which is where you get, complex cognitive behavior, personality expression, decision-making, social behavior, and in the hippocampus, which is memory. So the microbiome, when we're very young, continues the job of making us really smart. And then the fourth initiation is, the second part for the immune system. The first part is what should you tolerate? What don't you fight? The second part is, what do you fight? What is other? And so the microbiome is then teaching the baby immune system, educating it, guiding it on what kind of things, what are the infections it should attack. Now, how do we lose the microbiome? Well, there's four dangers, you could say. So the first one is if a child doesn't get breast milk. The breast milk, not only does it contain over 200 different bacteria from the mother's gut, it's got over 600 different probiotics. There's more probiotics by weight in breast milk than there's protein. So that shows you how important nature thinks feeding the microbiome is. It's more important, it gives priority to feeding the baby's microbiome over feeding the baby, because these prebiotics, which feed the microbiome, if the baby doesn't have a functioning microbiome, it can die of infection, or its brain won't properly develop. So that gives you an idea of just how important prebiotics are. So the second danger is we're actually, even if we are breastfed or we're not, once we're done being breastfed, you have to get those prebiotics, those foods for the microbiome from your diet. And most diets aren't going to contain them. This is because we don't eat as we did 10,000 years ago. And there's ways you can get these prebiotics. Most companies that sell prebiotic supplements, they'll sell you one or two of them. There's actually at least 8 that you need. We'll talk about that later. So we need to feed the microbiome. The third is exposure to things like glyphosates, which was originally patented as an antibiotic, artificial sugars, pharmaceuticals, chlorinated water. Those are all stressing out the microbiome. And then finally, things like Cipro, which can wipe out 50% of these species in the microbiome in a matter of days. Even the chronic low level of antibiotics people get in factory farmed meat has an effect. So all those things, Clive, they're weakening the microbiome, and we need to protect it if we want it to protect us.
Well, quite so. For people who want to try and eat their way there to a healthy microbiome, how effective would you compare that to, let's say people don't like fermented foods or whatever it might be, to supplementing? How effective is one against the other?
Sure. So the issue with eating primitively is most people are not going to like that kind of diet. Primitive peoples ate a lot of tubers because, they would only be successful on a hunt roughly 1/3 of the time. So it would be a lot of tubers, which can give you an awful lot of gas too. it will be a lot of, people would be doing seaweed, they'd be doing insects, mushrooms, a lot of connective tissue in the meat. It's a diet that most you can do, but supplementally, we'll talk about how you can do that. You know, it only takes a quarter of a teaspoon of the right prebiotics, like a single capsule, for your microbiome to be happy all day long. So rather than turn your entire diet upside down, I think this is one of those times where it's just like, okay, maybe I'll eat the way I like, or, you know, in a healthy manner, and I'll just take these few things. You know, it's like feeding your dog. You know, it's like, you can tell your dog, you know, hey, primitive dog, go out and hunt. But you could also say, hey, you know, I don't want the dog to be gone for days at a time and might get run over by a car. Why don't I just give it some good raw meat food for the dog? So what can we give our microbiome so that feeding it isn't a full-time job? So here, let me tell you what happens when the microbiome kind of doesn't get what it needs. So roughly speaking, there's two responses to the microbiome. One is dormancy and the other is phenotype drift, and I'll explain them both. Dormancy is when, in response to stress, the cells hibernate. They slow their metabolic activity to a near standstill. They're basically saying, hey, there's not enough food here. You know, maybe the weather's bad and my host isn't going out and eating. Maybe he's got injured and he just needs to lay low and heal up for a few days. No big deal. I'll sleep, and when the food comes back, I'll wake up again. You know, the challenge is what happens when these things have been hibernating for a really long time, and they're like, hey, I can't hibernate anymore. So what happens is eventually they either die or they do what's called phenotype drift, which means they start looking in their DNA and thinking, hey, I'm not surviving well with the normal way I'm existing. Are there any other ways I can exist? And it looks back and says, well, geez, you know, before I was a symbiotic bacteria, I was commensal. And before that, maybe I was parasitic. Maybe one of those strategies will work. And so you can end up, if you don't feed your microbiome long enough, it's the same thing as like not feeding your dog. It can go feral on you. And now a feral microbiome is no longer helping you, and it might actually be hurting you. So like, take E. coli, for example. There's lots of forms of E. coli. The ones that you receive from your mother are symbiotic, and they're excellent members of the microbiome. But the ones you might find in the external environment, or because of the way we give grains as food to cows and it changes the pH of their gut, these guys can cause disease. So, you know, the same thing with E. coli, with Candida. There are fungi that are beneficial, like Boulardii, and then there's ones that are pathogenic. And a lot of this has to do with either A, having the ones that you've got go through phenotype drift because they're starving, or B, if you knock out some of your microbiome, you can absorb some of these environmental ones that are not adapted to humans.
Well, quite. Saccharomyces boulardii is particularly interesting, I think. I was taught 15, 20 years ago the idea that if you have a damaged gut lining, that you take Saccharomyces boulardii, and then that knocks out the negative versions of the Candida. And then if you take a full spectrum probiotic, 3 hours later, it fills the gaps. I don't know whether you've heard that principle. Kind
of. So if you knock out the fungi, then you can have things take up that residence, but it won't necessarily knock out all the bad bacteria. And the kind of probiotics that are available in stores are not necessarily what we need. And I'll explain why probiotics kind of fail us, but how to be an intelligent consumer and what kind of specialized probiotics that you might not have heard of are now becoming available. So let's talk about what happens when the microbiome goes bad. Or how to, you know, the first thing you might think is, oh, I'm going to get digestive issues. And yes, but that's actually very rarely the first main thing you notice. One of the things you notice is a lack of homeostasis, increased inflammation, the immune system goes out of whack, you can get SIBO, toxicity goes up. So let's look at a lack of homeostasis. Homeostasis is the ability to keep a particular system within two bounds, right? So the homeostasis of blood sugar, if the blood sugar goes too high, glycation and insulin insensitivity and diabetes, and if it gets too low, coma and low blood sugar and other issues and depression. So you want to keep the blood sugar at an even keel, and of course the pancreas does this for you, but so does the microbiome, and the microbiome may play possibly an equal or more important role in blood sugar than the pancreas in some ways. So a person will lose homeostasis. Now, it may not be insulin, it might be something else. They might find that their mood is just unstable. They could go back and forth between the irritability of cortisol and the depression of low serotonin and dopamine. The ability to maintain a stable mood, that kind of homeostasis, also microbiome. Toxicity, we're taught that the liver is the main detox organ and the kidneys. Yeah, but that's for the stuff that gets into your bloodstream. Your microbiome should be handling all the toxins you eat before it even gets there. Inflammation, a healthy microbiome breaks down all the inflammatory molecules whereas an imbalanced microbiome will generate a lot of lipopolysaccharides, which is the cell wall for gram-negative bacteria, and that's among the most inflammatory stuff out there. You can also get bacteria going across a leaky gut and setting up shop somewhere. So, for instance, arthritis is often proteobacteria in the joints that came from leaky gut. Okay, so how about immune dysfunction? So there's a lot of ways in which the microbiome manages our immunity, and let's just say parasites is one example. Parasites are a very ancient adversary, and while our mammalian form of our immune system is about 200 million years old, we've been dealing with, parasites have been around for 500 million years. So they've got a little bit of a heads up on us. And, parasites in 500 million years have learned a lot of nasty tricks. One of the things they do is they'll vary the surface proteins so the immune system can't recognize them. They come in, and Lyme does this all the time. Imagine somebody robs a bank with a blue jacket and a red hat, and then so the police put out and say, "Hey, blue jacket, red hat, look out for this guy." And as soon as they get out of the bank, off comes that, and then they put on a green hat and white overalls, and now the cops are looking for that. So parasites do that all the time. And if you consider T. brucei, which is the parasite that causes sleeping sickness, it's got over 2,000 genes that'll vary the protein on its surface. So these guys are masters of disguise, right? They're basically invisible. And invisibility is a game changer in combat, right? That's why, having night vision in combat is so important. So the other thing is certain parasites will also create protein coats that are virtually identical to human tissue. And it takes a really balanced and educated immune system to say, okay, that's not human tissue, I have to attack it, but this is human tissue, I need to leave it alone, right? So another trick that parasites use is they trigger our good bacteria to go rogue, to go feral, to become bad. So now, rather than helping us, now our microbiome actually becomes negative. So those are a lot of the tricks that they do. But the microbiome is actually older than parasites. Bacteria is older than parasites. So for all the things that the parasites can do, the microbiome has been around twice as long as that, and they usually know how to deal with it if it's healthy. A healthy microbiome won't fall for those tricks. It will tell the immune system, hey, you see that guy who just turned into white overalls? That's the same guy that robbed the bank. Go get him. You need a microbiome to unmask or to decloak infections like Lyme and other things. So, I guess one thing we could say is, how do we know if the microbiome is bad? And like I said, you can spend $500 and get a stool test. Unfortunately, a lot of the stool tests I'm seeing don't have even some of the basic information like stool pH and ammonia levels in them. If that's something you want, Vibrant America makes a good test. But there's still a lot of bacteria that they're not finding, that they don't know to look for. And you should be able, let me tell you how you can tell a very easy way to get a sense if your microbiome is out of whack. There's two things you can do. The first Well, three things. The first is your stool shouldn't stink terribly. It shouldn't smell good. It should have that acidic short-chain fatty acid smell. But if it smells like putrefaction, if it smells like rotting meat, if it smells like really bad, really offensive, something's up. You're making the wrong kind of things in there. The second is, do you need a lot of toilet paper? Now, let's say it's the 1700s and I want to buy a horse, right? And someone says, I got a horse. I'll say it's 5 years old and in great health. So what I do is I go to the horse and I open up its mouth and I look at its teeth, right? That's why they say don't look a gift horse in the mouth, because when you look at its teeth and you see how far the gums have receded, you know how old the horse is by that. And I look in the teeth, I'm like, okay, 5, maybe 6 years old, fine. But horse is healthy, right? Oh, horse is healthy, great. Put my hand on the horse and walk over so it doesn't kick me, so it knows I'm back there. Lift up the tail and look at its backside. And I see that horse has soiled itself. I'm like, oh, this is a sick horse. What are you trying to do, right? No healthy animal soils itself. No healthy animal needs toilet paper. The fact that we need toilet paper is a sign of sickness. So when you get when you've got the right prebiotics feeding your microbiome, you will likely find you don't need toilet paper anymore. And I know I've said this to a number of people and they all think that's impossible. I use 5 to 6 wads of toilet paper each time, and a week later they're all like, you should sell it, that prebiotic stuff you make in the next to the toilet paper section in the supermarkets, because you wouldn't need toilet paper. It's so that's a big one. If you need toilet paper, and the more that you need, the sicker your microbiome. And not to get overly visual, but basically you should wipe one time and there's nothing there. Okay. How long does it take to go from your mouth to the toilet? And it should take about 18 to 24 hours. The longer it takes, the more problems it's going to be, right? If it takes less than 18 hours, then a person doesn't have enough time to absorb the food they're eating. And more than 24, and they're starting to putrefy. Now, someone will say, well, I go to the bathroom every day, so I don't have a problem with that. Well, my response is, oh, okay, that's great. You go to the bathroom every day, but what's coming out of you, when did it go in? Because if what goes in is something you ate 7 days ago, and you have a 7-day transit time, but every day you go to the bathroom, but it's from 7 days ago, that's not healthy. So it's not just that you're regular, it's that you're regular and your transit time is good. And the easy way to do that is to go get some chlorophyll from supplement, liquid chlorophyll. And yes, I know it's chlorophyllin and it's got too much copper in it, so don't do a lot of it repetitively, but just go buy the chlorophyll, the liquid, and do a tablespoon of that, and then count the number of hours it takes for your stool to turn green. And it'll be real easy, because when you go to the toilet, the chlorophyll in the stool will go into the water and you'll see a little bit of green in the water. Count that number of hours. Remember, it should be 18. And then gas production, right? Gas production is a sign of a troubled microbiome as well. And and then if you want to be a little bit more into it, you can get some pH paper, and you want pH paper that goes from 6 to 8. That's the range you're looking for. If it's a larger range, it's harder to tell what color is what. And you can just press it against the stool, and you can see roughly what your pH should be. It should be 6.8. If your pH is over 7, that's typically ammonia production from poorly digested meat, and excess ammonia production, aside from wrecking the gut microbiome, can basically cause neurologic problems. And if it's below 6.5, 6.4, now you're talking about the microbiome getting a different kind of bad bacteria that's creating all sorts of nasty acids. So you want the pH to be spot on 6.8, 6.7, fine. Okay, so now that I've told you, all about the microbiome, let me answer your question. How do you recover a healthy microbiome? And, the first thing you think is, well, what about something fermented, right? You said, hey, can I just do ferments? What kind of, do you do fermented yogurts and stuff, Clive?
From time to time.
Mm-hmm.
But I do try to eat unpasteurized cheese, and I eat sauerkraut every now and then. But luckily, I agree with you with the toilet paper thing. I use very little of it because there's no need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the kind of bacteria you're going to find in yogurt is not necessarily what's good for you, but what makes yogurt have a good consistency and texture and taste good. And the kind of probiotics you would find in ferments, that's a step up. They typically tend to be histamine-producing bacteria, and so if you're histamine sensitive, that's not good. What I suggest to people who want to do probiotics and want to ferment their own food, it's a great idea, is make their own yogurt. I'm dairy sensitive, so I use carrot cheese as a substrate, and I ferment with carrot cheese. And what you can do is find some probiotics you like, and then put them in the carrot juice or dairy, and take it to about 95 degrees and hold it there. So you'll need some kind of incubator. And in 2 to 3 days, it should taste sour. Let you know if it's carrot juice. You'll actually see the liquid kind of get split. You'll see the solids go down and the straw-colored material come up, and it'll taste sour. And when it's sour, that's all these short-chain fatty acids that the microbiome is making, and that's a good sign that it's ready. Dairy, you'd have to just go by taste again, or maybe depending if you're doing raw milk, you might see it curdle, and yeah, you'd actually see the curds and whey separate. So pick some bacteria probiotics that you like and test them one at a time and just see how they affect your gut, right? And then we'll take the ones that you like and mix them together. And so, you know, there's thousands of bacteria in the gut, and most of them are not, many of them are not known. Most of them are not available commercially, but there are a couple of good ones. Reuteri is good. You know, the histamine-free ones from foods for gut are good. I like Oxalobacter, which breaks down oxalates, is another nice one. When you're talking about raw cheese, that's an Enterococcus. And if you're going to do raw cheese, get raw cheese from Southern Europe, because Northern Europeans don't like to use Enterococcus in their cheese because they think oh, that's found in stool. That's not healthy. I'm like, well, yes, but all of these bacteria are found in stool. So that's an odd argument to make. It can give it a little bit of a more intense taste that I think the Southern Europeans prefer. So the Southern European cheeses will have a better bacterial mix for you. But before you start thinking about, okay, so I guess the question is, why are we at a point where all these bacteria aren't available? It's just the time. And right now, they've got to find them all. They've got to prove they're all safe before they can let them into the market. And then they've got to find a way to grow them. The kind of probiotics that you find available for sale are ones that grow really well in a giant industrial vat. The ones that grow really well in the human gut are much more difficult to grow. So we're still at the point now of learning how to upscale industrial human gut simulators to make the bacteria we really need. But it's going to be a few years at least before a lot of these are available. So where can you get the good bacteria from? Well, there's a couple of reserves, right? The first are the dormant cells you've already got. You may have a lot of the bacteria you need. They're just sleeping. You just got to feed them and they'll wake up. So you just add the prebiotics, the oligosaccharides. And the second is the appendix. The appendix actually is not a vestigial organ. It's a reserve for your microbiome. And then the third reserve is what would be other people, which would be a microbiome transplant. And that is something you can do. And some people will be really served by that if they completely wiped out their gut microbiome. But for most of us, all you really need to do is feed them. Now, if you think that if you realize that a bacteria has a doubling time of 20 minutes, then you can go from one bacteria to 34 billion copies in 12 hours. So if you feed them, it doesn't take long. Okay, so can you get it with the diet? All right, so we got to feed them. That's the key. Feed the microbiome. Can you get it with the diet? Maybe, but you'd be eating a lot of foods you probably might not like. Tubers like Jerusalem artichokes that are going to give you a lot of gas. Insects, mushrooms, seaweed. That's going to be there, along with a lot of raw connective tissue. And then you have to have a really good digestion to even get these things out of the food you're eating. So when I realized that I wanted to repair my microbiome, I identified 8 oligosaccharides that I thought were key, that would be found in a primitive diet. And I calculated out what I thought the ratio of them would be if I were a primitive human hunter-gatherer. And I made a product called Panaceum, and it contains all 8 of those. And if you want to try to recreate it on your own, what you'd be looking at is galactosaccharides. Those are found in tubers. xylo-oligosaccharides, pectin oligosaccharides, and fructo-oligosaccharides are found in certain fruits and vegetables, like baobab is a good one from Africa. Connective tissue oligosaccharides are found in cartilage, insects, and mushrooms. Fucoidan oligosaccharides are found in seaweed, and the isomalto oligosaccharides are found in honey, raw honey, miso, and kimchi. So that's one way you can go. And now you might say, well, geez, do I really need all 8 of them? That's a lot of oligosaccharides. Okay, so there's a few reasons why you want as many oligosaccharides as you can get in different types. The first is oligosaccharides act as decoy molecules that prevent pathogenic bacteria from attaching to the gut wall. So if you have pathogenic bacteria and they're looking to attach to the gut wall, and then they see some of these oligosaccharides, they think the oligosaccharides are your gut, they attach to them and they defecate them out. So the wider range of oligosaccharides you have, the more decoy, the more range of different bacteria you can attach to get rid of. The second is different bacteria require different food sources. So one probiotic, like when you see prebiotics for sale and you see it just has one or the other, well, it might just feed bifidus or it might just feed lactobacillus, but you've got thousands of species, and you never know which one they're going to eat. So you want to give them as many as you can. And the third reason is because these are not interchangeable. And I'll give you an example. I had a friend who was in her 20s, and she was 2 years into a pretty bad health crisis. And, she had a lot of inflammation and a lot of neurologic problems, and a lot of chronic fatigue. And, nothing seemed to help. And I'm like, well, your microbiome's out too, but I can't imagine that's what's causing your issues. But hey, maybe if we can help you out 10%, that's 10% more, right, than before. It looked like she was having heart conditions and all these other things. So anyway, we gave her, mixed up this batch of these 10 oligosaccharides, prebiotics. Prebiotic is another name for oligosaccharides. Oligosaccharide means a sugar that's of a certain size. The simple sugars we can absorb, that's like fructose, glucose. The complex sugars we can digest and absorb, that's the things in starches. But the sugars in the middle size, we can't digest them, but the microbiome can. Those are called oligosaccharides or prebiotics. So anyway, I gave her these 8 oligosaccharides, and wow, in 3 days, she was feeling better, I think, than she felt in 2 years. She was much more energetic. She was in a much better mood. It was great. And then I ran out of 2 of them. And so now she's taking 6. And then 3 days later, she's collapsing again. And I'm like, wow. I mean, aren't the other 6 that she's getting doing the job? I guess not. So I got those other 2. We gave them back to her. And then, 2 hours later, she got out of bed and made lunch. And over the next 4 days, she got her health back again. So the takeaway are that these oligosaccharides, these prebiotics, are not interchangeable. You need a wide range of them. And the second takeaway is if you can give the microbiome what it needs, even though you can recover so much more quickly, right? There's a lot of things that take a long time to heal. For instance, nerves, they grow really, really slowly. They can take months and months and months to regenerate. The microbiome is on the other side of the equation. It's probably the fastest thing to regenerate. I mean, we think skin heals quickly, right? You burn your tongue with some hot tea, the next day you're fine, right? But the microbiome is even faster than that. As long as you've got them in there, as long as they're just dormant and just waiting to be fed, you give the oligosaccharides to the microbiome, Clyde, and within a day, they're replicating massively. And then you've got maybe another day while they go and, clean shop, go after all the parasites, go after all the fungi, go after all the bad bacteria, clean them out. And then what you got is like within 2 or 3 days, your microbiome is in so much better shape. You get the mucus lining getting regenerated, so much stuff.
And so if the result is that rapid, let's say now you've got over the hump, how often do you then need to do a top up with them?
So, right. So think of them like as your pet, right? You wouldn't, so how often do you need to feed your pet? I find that once a day for me is fine. If you take too much, you can end up overfeeding bacteria and might get a little extra gas. So I would say take the amount just shy of giving you gas, where you're overproducing, getting too much bacteria. For me, one capsule a day does the job. Let me tell you something interesting that happened to me, right? So I started taking them too, Clive. I started taking the prebiotics, the Panaceum blend. And this is what happened over the course of a month. First, my eyesight started getting better. I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. Then my physical strength improved. You know, I have a small gym in my garage, you know, and I kind of plateaued on how much weight I could lift. And so I'm doing a bench press, and I'm like, wow, I think I need to add a few more plates onto this. I'm getting stronger. And then my endurance improved. I found that I could do exercise for a longer period of time. And here's what I really liked. My balance improved. I have never had good balance. I could never stand on one foot for more than a few seconds. I could never dance. And suddenly I'm standing on one foot and I can dance without falling over on myself. Better late than never, right? Dancing's a lot of fun. That was really weird because, you know, that's brain and nerves. I would have thought that at 53, when I started, 54 now, that whatever had happened to my brain that made me lose my sense of balance, that was it. I never had it, and I was probably never going to get it. So the fact that it could repair that, an injury that I actually had from being a mid-forceps delivery and having my head crushed during the birthing sequence, that it could fix a 53-year-old brain injury was pretty amazing. And then the last thing is my skin got much more resistant to scrapes and cuts. As you know, Clive, I live off grid on 100 acres. And when you live off grid, you know, you're splitting wood, you're hauling things around, and you get cut a lot. You know, your skin gets cut. So I was outside and I caught my foot on something, and I'm like, oh boy, I really must have gashed that. That was a pretty bad cut. And I get inside and I'm thinking, gosh, am I going to need to suture this thing? You know, staple it closed. And I look down on my foot. Clive, the skin wasn't cut. It was red. That was it. And what I've been noticing over the last 10 years is my skin would cut easier and easier as I got older, got more and more fragile. And that was gone. My skin was kind of youthful again. And so I'm like, all right, better eyesight, better strength, better endurance, better mood, better balance, more resistant to cuts and scrapes. What do all these things have in common? And I realized these are all things that get worse with age. Every last one of them gets worse with age. They're whole. And basically what the microbiome was doing is making me younger, Clive.
I like the sound of that. I mean, you know, I want some immediately. Yeah.
So
well,
yeah,
that's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, the microbiome, you know, it's the ultimate human upgrade. It's the best friend and ally for your health you could ever hope for. And all it's asking for, Clive, all you got to do is just give it like a quarter a teaspoon of these oligosaccharides that you don't even digest anyway. You give it that, and it will do so much for you, Clive.
Well, I'm going to put a link to where to get it underneath this video, and we're going to have to stock it. So we shall be in discussion about that very thing. So that's absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much. I will come back in a month or so's time and give a report to the people listening to this to see how I fared, and I'll give it to everybody I know, and I shall report back. Thank you very much.
Sounds like a plan, Clyde. Hey, thanks for having me on.